So the path is actually the meat of the use case. It is a core concept in the use case world, and there are going to be many different paths through a given use case. We're going to distinguish each one, so you're actually going to look at each path as a single instance of the use case, meaning one event, one handling of the event, and ultimately the completion of the use case. It is very often also called the flow of events or the course of events, I believe was the original term used back in the 80s when it was invented. A key part of the use case thinking is that the use case represents a step-by-step sequence of interactions between actors and the application that are ultimately going to deliver a measurable value. Now, one of the key words in that sentence is the word uninterrupted. At least in theory, when you initiate a use case, you should be going through it without pause, without stopping, without doing anything else. Obviously, the question then becomes, well, what's an interrupt? If I'm using the internet, for example, and I put in a request and I'm sitting there for 3 seconds waiting for the internet to display a page, is that an interrupt? No, it's not. What we're talking about is there should be no point in the sequence of events where all of a sudden there's a breakdown, where you are required to wait on the next step or something like that. Actually, if there's what is considered to be a significant amount of time between two steps of a use case, what you should do is terminate the use case and set the stage for another event that is going to re-trigger the use case whenever that event happens, which would be a different use case entirely. So, an uninterrupted sequence of events, and again, the key is that they are ultimately going to lead to measurable value. Remember, at this point in time, we're at the detailed level of a use case. So the path describes observable interactions. It does not reveal how the work is going to get done. We don't care how you decide which product to select or how you decide which credit card to pay or anything like that. All we're interested in is the single step-by-step interaction that is ultimately going to lead to the final value. The use case path starts with a trigger, bunch of interactions between the actor and the application, may involve other actors, and ultimately the value is going to be provided to the initiating actor. So at the detail level, the path in a use case is a sequence of interactions between an initiating or other involved actors and the application that you are describing. It's important that every step in a given path is unconditional, meaning there are no if statements in a use case path. You're only thinking about visible interactions, only things that would be apparent to the outside world. It's an external view of the application. You're not getting onto the inside of the application. You're not identifying steps that the application, the coding that is going to be done in the coding. You think about it as a dialogue. I mean, you're writing here a script, and this dialogue is between actors and the application. They're talking to the computer is responding. Because there's no branches in a path. Now, we're going to talk a little later on about how branches come into use cases. That's a whole different question. They actually have a very elegant solution that they have come up with that adds a lot of power to the use case construct as a tool for communicating with from the business community to developers as to what the business community needs. Key thing about every path in the use case, keep it as simple as you can. Remember the the lean principles, that you're trying to provide value, you're trying to eliminate waste. Don't add steps just because they are cute. Don't add any steps because of technology. For instance, whether the app is running on a cell phone or on a computer, PC, laptop, tablet, whatever else, does not matter to the use case at this point in time. If a developer decides they want to create a system-level use case which shows interaction between devices, that's another use of the use case. Not what we are trying to achieve here. We're trying to achieve a definition of how the business community wants to interact with the application. Since the path is very fundamental to the use case, it's at the core of the use case, if you will, I'd like to offer you a few different options for how you can document a path in a use case. First one is my preference. It is a very simple list of the steps, just like if I were writing a screenplay. The example here would be that we're going to be using, by the way, for all of these representations is customer pays premium. So assuming that this is an insurance application, automobile insurance, I bought it online, and I want to pay the premium online. The first step is customer logs in. The application displays the customer's policies, assuming that I may have more. I select the policy that I want to pay, and the system displays current payment status. Customer considers or selects which payment option to use, such as credit card or PayPal or whatever other account I might want to use for this particular transactions. System gives me credit card interface if I select a credit card, and customer enters card info. The system processes the payment, it offers me a receipt, and I print the receipt and log off. Now, you can see here very clearly the dialog. System does something, customer starts it, system reacts. Customer responds, system reacts. So there is this interaction that is going on, and this particular format of documenting use case shows that interaction very clearly. Now, there is a secondary mode of documentation that some people prefer, which is a table. Now, if you prefer to document this customer pays premium in a table, you would have a column for the actor and a column for the application. And if you had third actors, you would have to add columns for those. If you have secondary actors, such as the example earlier, the MTPS, the main transaction processing system. I also, by the way, need a column for the steps because I still need to be able to reference the step in the process. So actor first starts off, the customer is requesting policies, system shows policies. Customer selects the policy. Because I have this in a table, I don't have to use the word customer every time because that is the column. So select policy. On the application side, it shows the policy with current payment status. Customer selects the payment option. System presents the credit card interface. Customer enters card info, processes the system process payment. System offers receipt. Customer prints receipt, returns the policy list. This is exactly the same use case, just in a different form. You can use the dialog form, very simple list, whereas every step has to be numbered, or you can use a table such as this. There is an even simpler form that a lot of people prefer, and if you're dealing with experienced developers who are very knowledgeable about the topic you're covering, this might be enough. This form is basically simply a functional list of the things that are happening. Select policy is the first function we need. We need to then choose a payment method. We need to enter payment details. We have to pay the policy, and we have to capture the receipt in some way, shape, or form. Now you'll notice we went from 11 steps on the first use case down to 5. So this is obviously a much simpler mode. Now, if you're thinking lean, if you're thinking about trying to make sure that you do not do any additional work on a use case, the functional list might be where you start. So you could actually go from a brief, that's a very brief description of it, to a functional list. And then if the developers need it later on, you get more into the full-blown dialogue, customer application, secondary actor, and so forth. So you have actually 3 different ways of documenting a single use case path. Now that we know how to document the path, let's talk about the different flavors or different types of paths that are used in a use case. There's a thing called the main path, sometimes also referred to as the standard path or the basic path. It's also been referred to as the happy path, but a lot of people don't like bringing emotion into the use case. The use case itself is pretty no feelings. So I personally tend to avoid the use of the word happy path. Now, main path, standard path, basic path, you can call it any of those things, or actually you can call it happy path if you like that. Just consider the fact that not all use cases represent happy circumstances, and because of that, giving it an emotion can kind of tinge the process. Now, key thing about the main path. The main path is going to handle most of the interactions, meaning the majority of things that are happening when people use this use case should be going through the main path. The main path will always deliver the value that the use case provides, meaning it will start with the trigger, it will go through the sequence of steps that are in the use case, and it will complete once that use case value has been delivered. It's a step-by-step process. Shopper placing the order, the example here, goes all the way until the system has confirming the order, so the shopper knows that this order is legit and they will be getting the goods. But that's ideal circumstances. The world isn't always ideal, unfortunately, so there are times when we need something different. Well, there's a concept called an alternate path. An alternate path exists when you want to do something a little bit different. So whereas under the main path, it might be the customer paid with a credit card, an alternate path might be the customer pays with PayPal. Now there's going to be a few deviations, if you will, in between the main path when the customer is paying with credit card and when the customer is paying with PayPal. but ultimately the ending will be the same. Now, an alternate path, by definition, is a different way of getting to the value that the use case should be providing. Alternate path will take a different route than the main path. It might go through different hoops. And by the way, it can go back and repeat different steps in the use case. For example, I might have an alternate path that says in the main path, the user is paying with credit card and the credit card processor rejects the card. The alternate path might say, all right, the customer selects a different card, puts that in, and it goes back to check that card. That card passes and it continues, and you are at a final, in the end, the customer has received the value that they wanted. There's a third type of a path, and not everybody uses this because some prefer to just consider it another type of alternate paths. For me, it's very important to distinguish the exception situations from alternates. In my universe, an alternate path always gets back to the main path and delivers the value that the use case promises. An exception path does not, and that's a very critical difference. The exception path will actually cause the use case to fail, meaning the value is not going to be provided. It actually has a different post condition than the main path or the alternate path. In that situation, these are situations where customer has put in a credit card, the credit card was rejected, they added a secondary card, it was rejected, they don't have any more cards, they quit. The system, they will not get the order, quite obviously. So we now have a situation where we have to handle an order that is incomplete. There's a whole different situation than if they actually ultimately finally got the order approved. So in my documentation, I like to distinguish between main paths, alternate paths, and exception paths very distinctly. These are actually, in my use case specification, 3 different sections of the use case that contain the appropriate paths. So what we really need to understand is how do we get from the main path into these alternate and exception paths? What does that process look like?